The Conservatives have called for a new national inquiry following calls from Elon Musk and also from Reform UK. Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, did it, claiming all this was a result of mass migration and the importation of what he called alien cultures which had medieval attitudes to women. Delighted to say that Mr. Jenrick joins us on the line from Westminster this morning. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Nick.
You have new leadership in the Conservative Party. When Kemi Badenoch became leader, she did something I think you approved of. She apologised, in effect. She said you got it wrong on immigration. Before we talk about the detail of what you want, are you willing to say now that your party in government got it wrong? You didn't do it enough when it came to protecting young women and girls from child abuse?
Well, look, there are young women who are subjected to this appalling violence and torture today. That is what the victims are telling us. So could we have done more? Should we do more now? Yes, absolutely. We have to root this out. We did do a lot in government. We know about this in part because of the reviews commissioned by Theresa May as Home Secretary, the work of Sajid Javid when he ensured that there was better data, including by ethnicity, the work of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary, who created the Grooming Gangs Task Force, which has led to 550 arrests and protected over 4,500 victims. There has been significant work, but more clearly needs to be done.
Well, we'll turn to what more needs to be done in future, but let's just focus on what you've just said. You could have done more. You in government over the last 14 years could have done more. Why did Conservative ministers refuse the request from Oldham Council to have the national inquiry, which you now say Labour ought to do?
Well, no, that's not right, Nick. The previous request that came from Oldham Council was by a small number of local councillors. The request that has come to this new Labour government is a different one. This is from the council itself.
Did the Conservatives set up an inquiry into what was happening in Oldham when you were in government?
No, because there was not a request. No, but Nick, we must make this clear. There was not a request from the council itself. The council have now asked that they do not have the bandwidth, the capacity to do this inquiry, and have asked the Home Office to organise one for them. I think it is very surprising. I can't, in fact, think of any good reason why the Home Office, armed with that request from the council itself, would not provide that support.
Well, we've just heard the good reason from Professor Alexis Jay, who set up and chaired the independent inquiry into child abuse. What she says is that another inquiry would be a distraction from implementing the changes that were recommended while the Conservatives were in power. So I ask another question. Why did the Conservatives in power not implement the findings of the independent inquiry into child abuse?
Well, firstly, we have the two central recommendations of the review were being taken forward by the last Conservative government.
Taken forward? They were not implemented, Mr. Jenrick. They are being implemented by this government.
Well, they do. Well, they are the things that we were taking forward. We drafted the legislation. It was in the criminal justice bill. It was before Parliament, but fell away as a result of the general election.
Hold on, you've been in government for 14 years. The first reports
the review
of
only
abuse
came
were
out
in
in
2010.
2022, Nick.
Well, that was your decision about when to set up an inquiry. The first reports of mass grooming and arrests were in 2010. The first inquiry into Rotherham Council was in 2014. The report in Greater Manchester to a police cover-up was in 2020. So if there was a delay setting up an inquiry into child abuse, would you like to accept that was a delay by Conservative ministers in a Conservative government?
No, Nick. Look, you asked me, were we taking forward the recommendations of the Jay review that was reported in 2022? The answer is yes. The two central recommendations were being legislated for by Parliament under the last Conservative government. We also created the Grooming Gangs Task Force, another important element of that. But I think that this situation is moving forwards. If you look at the Jay review, that only looked at 6 towns. In fact, they weren't even places where there was necessarily suspicion of grooming gang activity. We now know that this may be happening in up to 50 places across our country. That is why we need to have this full national inquiry.
But Professor Jay, if I
may just make this point.
Let me just deal with your detail.
If I can make this one point, please, Nick, because it's an important one. Yesterday, the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, was asked by the Member of Parliament for Keighley, Could she name the number of victims of this scandal in Keighley or Bradford district? She couldn't. She didn't know the information. That's not right. That frankly is shameful. We need to have this information.
It's not right, which is why the Home Secretary yesterday announced that one of the changes that this government is making, that your government did not make, is that data would be published. But I put your point.
That was being taken forward by the last Conservative government.
Sure.
The two
taken forward but not done.
The two central things that the Home Secretary announced yesterday were things that are already in train by the last Conservative government. Yeah. Let's just be clear about that.
OK, let's move on to an important point that you've just made, which is that the J Review, just to remind people, the independent inquiry into child abuse, only looked at 6 towns. She specifically, in detail, says that that is wrong. What she says is that the job of that inquiry was to look at 6 towns where there hadn't been allegations, to see whether they had the right approach to data collection, the right approach to revealing the information, and that all underlay the recommendations that she made. So far from ignoring suggestions of abuse in other towns and cities, she says she has the recommendations that are required to deal with that, and the job of politicians is to get on and do what your government failed to do, implement them.
No one is saying that Alexis Jay ignored what was happening. What I'm saying is we now know so much more. Telford, Oldham, Stockport, Sheffield, St Helens, Preston, Peterborough, Blackpool, Bradford, Keighley, Rochdale, Rotherham, Hull, Huddersfield, Bristol, Banbury, High Wycombe, Aylesbury. We know that this was happening in towns and cities the length and breadth of our country.
Well, if you know, why not simply implement the changes required to stop it?
The children in those places, Nick, they deserve justice. They deserve answers. We need to make sure that not a single vulnerable young girl is facing torture and rape in those towns and cities today.
How will an inquiry that takes months or years ensure justice, Mr Jenrick? Will not prosecutions ensure justice?
I want to do both,
Will
Nick.
not a new law ensure justice?
I want to
Will
do
not
both,
better
Nick.
Data collection ensure justice?
Nick, I have been arguing for some time that we should have, for example, full life sentences for the perpetrators. I've been saying that if they're foreign nationals, they should be deported from our country. No ifs, no buts. That the cowardly public officials and councillors who covered this up
Did you
should
raise
be
it when you were a Home
prosecuted.
Office Minister?
Look, I wrote about this last year.
Did you raise it when you were a Home Office Minister?
When I was Home Office Minister with Suella Braverman, we did take forward.
Did you raise it when you were a Home Office Minister, Mr Jenrick?
Well, I did discuss this with the Home Secretary, but it wasn't my portfolio. I did discuss it with the Home Secretary.
Did you raise it in the House of Commons?
Nick, I wrote about this last year, and I was criticised for it.
Yes, I've checked Hansard today, and it's not a perfect test. When you put in the name Robert Jenrick, grooming, no mention. Grooming gang,
I wrote about
no
this,
mention.
Nick, I
Rotherham,
wrote about this last
no
year.
mention. Oldham,
I wrote
no
about
mention.
This, Nick, last year,
Rochdale,
and
no
was
mention.
criticised by
Child
the media
sexual
for doing
abuse,
so.
no mention, Mr Jenrick. Child rape, no mention. You have not raised, or have you? Please correct me if my search is wrong. The issue of mass gang rape and child sex abuse that you're so energised about, you have no evidence you raised it as a minister and no evidence that you've raised it in the House of Commons.
Nick, I wrote about this last year and was criticised by the media for doing so. Suella Braverman was heavily criticised by the media for raising this and by making the link to the cultural and immigration elements that lie behind it.
Well, let's turn to that because it's an important
But this is not about us. This is about the victims,
Sure.
and it is right to hold a full national inquiry.
Let's turn to what you said about culture, which you have just said. Just to remind people who may not have read it and then give you the chance to explore what you meant by this. You wrote an article in which you said there was a link between what we're talking about and the need, in your words, to end mass migration. You went on, not all cultures are equal, importing hundreds of thousands of people from alien cultures who possess what you call medieval attitudes towards women brought us here. Which cultures are you talking about?
Look, millions of people, Nick, have come into the UK in recent times. Some of these people hold backwards attitudes to women. We know from the J report that British Pakistani men were overrepresented as members of these rape gangs. And we know that many selected their victims because they were white and viewed them as worthless as a result. It is important that we're honest about that.
And
I'm
being
not
honest,
going to
do you want to
sanitize
stop
or disguise
migration
my
of
language.
Pakistanis?
Look, I think that it is very difficult to successfully integrate the very large numbers of people who we have had coming into our country in recent years. We should be open about that.
Are you saying that people from Pakistan have a medieval culture?
I think some people who come from that country do. I'm not saying everybody.
Does Sajid Javid's family
come
with a medieval culture to this country?
Nick, I'm saying some people do.
Does Sadiq Khan's family
I'm saying some people do, Nick.
Well, how are you going to identify those that you think are acceptable and those are not?
Are you disputing, Nick, the evidence outlined by the reports that you have cited and the testimonies of the victims, in fact, the testimonies of the perpetrators themselves, that many cases were Pakistani men, some born in this country,
Nobody's disputing it. I'm asking you what you would do as a result of it. Would you stop immigration from those countries?
I've always said, and this is the point made by Kemi Badenoch, the leader of my party, that not all cultures are equal. We should be very careful about who is coming into this country and the scale of immigration.
So why did the numbers of Pakistanis coming into this country increase when you were in the Home Office and increase since Brexit under the Conservative government?
Firstly, when I was in the Home Office, we made the biggest reduction in net migration in living memory.
Just answer the question, if you will, Mr. Jenrick.
I am answering the question.
Did immigration from the culture you say is alien, your words, not mine, did it go up or down when you were in the Home Office and the Conservatives were in government?
I've been very clear in the past that the numbers of people coming into this country rose significantly, too much, and that is wrong.
So we need to be clear.
We made mistakes when we were in office.
Are you saying that certain countries have, in your words, alien cultures with medieval attitudes, and that British immigration policy should now be remade to stop people coming from those countries?
I think that we have to be very careful about who is coming into this country, the scale and pace of that immigration,
so that we can
have a much more successful integration policy than we've had today. Nobody, frankly, could say that integration is working well in this country when you see evidence like this.
What is the answer to the question about whether Conservatives want to see a new immigration policy that would specifically say that some cultures are more acceptable than others?
We have said that we want to reduce the number of people coming in to this country, and we want to have a legally binding cap set by Parliament. We're going to determine the level at which, the threshold at which that is set in the months or years ahead. But it's by having it at a much lower level that we can successfully integrate people into this country.
Understood. Now, the reason I'm pushing you hard is because you've got a record in government to defend, and as you've been clear, you feel very strongly about this now, but didn't always feel quite so strongly about it at first.
I've always felt strongly about it, Nick.
Well, there are people who note that the Conservatives only called for this inquiry after Elon Musk called for it and after Reform UK.
It has absolutely nothing to do with Elon Musk, Nick.
Well, what first attracted a man ambitious to be leader of his party in his country to the billionaire social media tycoon Elon Musk's call for an inquiry?
Look, this issue, Nick, this has nothing to do. You, I think, very wisely opened this interview by saying that this is not about Elon Musk. This is about the young girls, the victims. Let's focus on them,
not on tweets. About your rhetoric.
Not on tweets. Well, I haven't mentioned Elon Musk. You're the one who's asking me.
No, I'm asking about your
You're the one
rhetoric,
who's asking me about him.
Some people have warned, including
this debate,
chair of the independent inquiry.
If I may say,
she's made a warning about the rhetoric. The man who was head of counter-terrorism, former Metropolitan Police Commander Neil Basu, has made a warning about the rhetoric being used in this debate. The former Conservative number 10 advisor on race has made a warning about rhetoric on this debate. I'm asking you whether you think you have a need, while keen to exploit the government's difficulties, to be wary of your words.
This is about young girls being systematically raped for decades, and you're asking me about disguising my language so as not to offend people. I'm not going to tiptoe around this issue. That is what got us into this mess in the first place. As Alexis J has said powerfully, it was people who were fearful of being accused of racism, who were fearful of political correctness. It was as a result of that charge that people hid this. That led to cowardice. That led to young girls being raped and tortured. We've got to get away with this.
So
get
just to
away
be clear,
from this
Mr.
debate.
Jenrick, because I think you are being clear about this, but I want to give you the opportunity to react directly. The former Conservative advisor on race issues, a man called Samuel Kasumu, said that some of his words, your words, may result, and I quote, in some people maybe even dying. He has the potential to incite hatred in ways that I have never seen. Does that quote make you pause for 1 second?
I think that's complete nonsense. Look, MPs have been killed in this country in recent times by a jihadist and by a neo-Nazi. They were killed because of the views of those individuals, not of what anything an MP has said. We have to fight extremism in this country wherever we find it. And you fight that by standing up to the extremists. You don't fight it by shying away, by turning a blind eye, by looking the other way. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to tiptoe around this issue. Millions of people in our country are listening to your programme this morning, and they are appalled by what is happening to young girls. And they are shocked that there might be girls in that situation today. We have to stop this. And we don't stop this by shying away from saying difficult things and saying language clearly and bluntly when it's necessary.
Click here for Deirdre versus Nigel Farage.